In the winter of 1943, as the war in Europe entered its most punishing phase, the American tank crews who had grown confident in their steel companions, the M4 Shermans, began to encounter something they had never seen before. Reports filtered through the lines, carried by British liaison officers and armored reconnaissance patrols, of a new German tank so heavily armored and armed that it could destroy any Allied vehicle before being seen. At first, many dismissed it as exaggeration, a soldier's rumor magnified by fear. But soon the sound of its massive 88mm gun would shatter that illusion forever. The Tiger I was not merely a machine of war, it was a statement of engineering arrogance, conceived in an age when Germany still believed it could outbuild and outgun the world. Its arrival on the Western Front stunned the men of the United States Armored Forces. They had already faced Panzer IVs and self-propelled guns across Tunisia and Sicily, and though those battles were brutal, they had learned their rhythm, a duel of speed, flanking, and coordination. The Tiger was different. It stood on the battlefield like a fortress, its thick, nearly impenetrable armor deflecting most Allied shells with a dull metallic scream. When the first Tigers appeared in Tunisia in late 1942 under the command of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, they met British and American forces unprepared for such a beast. The U.S. 1st Armored Division, already hardened by desert warfare, suddenly found their 75mm guns bouncing harmlessly off German hulls. Reports from the front used words like monstrous and invulnerable. Some units mistook the Tigers for experimental assault guns or misidentified them as a new version of the Panzer VI. They were not far from the truth. For the American tank crews, the first encounters were chaotic and terrifying. Sergeant John Earzik, who would later write about the experience, recalled how the psychological effect of the Tiger was sometimes deadlier than its gun. The mere rumor that a Tiger was in the area made entire columns rethink their routes and tactics. Sherman crews, accustomed to using mobility to offset thin armor, realized quickly that speed meant nothing if the enemy could destroy them from over a mile away. In January 1943, near the small Tunisian village of Maknessi, American tankers experienced one of the first direct confrontations. As Shermans rolled over the dunes, they spotted silhouettes on the ridge, large, boxy shapes, standing unnaturally still. Within seconds, flashes of light tore through the dust and armor-piercing rounds screamed through the air. 2 Shermans exploded before their crews could even respond. The survivors tried to flank, maneuvering through olive groves, but the Tigers pivoted slowly and methodically, tracking them with turret rotations so smooth they seemed mechanical in precision. That battle lasted less than 15 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 6 Shermans were burning. The Germans withdrew not because they were forced to, but because their orders demanded conservation of their machines. For the Americans, it was a sobering revelation. They had just faced a weapon unlike any they had known. News of the engagement spread rapidly through the armored corps. Intelligence officers collected fragments of shell casings, photographs, and eyewitness accounts. In the weeks that followed, training manuals were quietly adjusted. Crews were taught to avoid frontal engagements and to call for artillery or air support when a Tiger was sighted. The word Tiger itself became shorthand for dread. In Italy months later, the lessons of Tunisia still echoed. Near Anzio and Cassino, American units again faced the Tigers, now supported by Panther tanks and the deadly 88mm anti-tank guns dug into the hillsides. The Shermans struggled to adapt. Their 75mm shells could penetrate only at extremely close range or from the rear. Crews learned to fight as teams, sacrificing one tank to distract while others circled behind. Every victory came at a cost. To the men inside those Shermans, the battlefield was a crucible of fire and sound. The roar of the radial engines, the clatter of treads, the acrid smell of cordite and oil, all mixed with the distant thunder of German shells. When a Tiger fired, the air itself seemed to crack open. One veteran described it as being hit by God. But the Americans were not without resolve. They studied the enemy. Engineers and analysts worked feverishly to understand the Tiger's weaknesses. Its weight, nearly 57 tons, made it slow and mechanically fragile. In muddy conditions it could bog down. In steep terrain, its transmission overheated. The U.S. Army began to exploit those flaws, using air reconnaissance to track movements and coordinate strikes. The doctrine shifted from meeting the Tiger head-on to breaking the systems that supported it: fuel lines, supply trucks, repair depots. By late 1943, the Allies were capturing damaged and abandoned Tigers. One such vehicle, Tiger 131, fell into British hands in Tunisia, intact except for a jammed turret. Engineers disassembled it piece by piece, uncovering its secrets: the layered armor, the precision-cut gears, the massive Maybach engine. Those findings were shared with American ordnance teams and used to refine future tank designs and anti-armor tactics. Still, on the front line, the encounters continued to test courage. In Normandy, 1944, when the U.S. 2nd Armored Division landed and began pushing through the bocage, they again faced Tigers, now under the command of elite SS units. The narrow lanes and hedgerows favored ambush. American tankers advanced yard by yard, scanning every gap in the hedges, listening for the distinct growl of a German engine. For the new replacements, hearing veterans speak of the Tiger was almost mythological. "You'll know it when you see it," one corporal told them. And they did, not by sight at first but by sound, a deep, rolling hum that grew into a metallic thunder. When a Tiger appeared at the edge of a Norman field, cutting through the mist like a moving bunker, everything slowed. The Shermans fired first, their shells bursting harmlessly against the German armor. The Tiger replied once, and an entire crew vanished in a bloom of orange flame. Yet even in the face of that, the Americans pressed forward. They radioed artillery coordinates, called for P-47 Thunderbolts, and swarmed from both flanks. The battlefield was chaos, smoke, dust, screaming metal, but out of that chaos came learning. For every Tiger that stood its ground, there were 10 American crews who refused to break. They adapted, improvised, and fought on. Those first encounters would forge a new kind of armored warfare for the U.S. Army, one not built solely on firepower, but on courage, cooperation, and relentless adaptation. As the Allied armies moved deeper into Europe, the legend of the Tiger tank grew even faster than the front lines themselves. Every new replacement in an armored unit was told stories of its power before ever seeing one. The veterans spoke of the sharp whistle of an 88mm shell cutting through the air, the deafening blast that followed, and the helpless feeling of watching friendly tanks burn before they could even close the distance. It wasn't just a weapon, it was an omen. For the American tankers, the Tiger was the embodiment of every fear a soldier could carry inside a steel coffin. In the months following the North African campaign, American ordnance officers and intelligence specialists studied every fragment recovered from destroyed German armor. They compiled meticulous reports describing armor thickness, ammunition types, and firing ranges. These analyses became the foundation for what would later evolve into improved Sherman variants, including the M4A3E8 EZ8, and the introduction of the 76mm gun, capable of penetrating heavier German armor. Yet even with these upgrades, meeting a Tiger on open ground still meant gambling with fate. By mid-1944, the Allies were preparing for the greatest invasion in history, Operation Overlord. Every briefing for armored crews included one chilling reminder. Somewhere beyond the beaches and hedgerows, the Tigers were waiting. The Germans knew the value of fear, and they positioned their heavy panzer battalions like chess pieces guarding key roads and towns. For the American tankers of the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions, the task was clear but daunting. They had to push through anyway. When the landings began in Normandy, the first American tanks rolled off the landing craft under artillery fire. Many never made it past the sand. The survivors clawed inland, their treads grinding over wreckage and bodies, until they reached the maze-like countryside of the bocage, a nightmare of narrow lanes and thick hedgerows perfect for ambush. Somewhere within that maze, the Tigers waited, camouflaged beneath branches and netting. The first recorded encounter between an American Sherman and a Tiger in France took place near Villers-Bocage. Although the most famous action there belonged to the British against Michael Whitman's Tigers, U.S. crews faced similar ambushes in the days that followed. A platoon from the 741st Tank Battalion advanced cautiously through the winding roads, their commanders scanning for movement. Suddenly, the sharp crack of an 88mm gun echoed through the hedgerows. The lead Sherman burst into flames, its turret blown clean off. The remaining tanks tried to reverse, but the narrow lane trapped them. A second shell tore through the second vehicle, igniting its ammunition racks. Panic and discipline wrestled for control inside the remaining crews. The platoon leader ordered his driver to smash through a hedgerow, sacrificing the tank's suspension just to escape the kill zone. As they broke into an open field, another Tiger appeared at the far end, silhouetted against the smoke. The commander screamed coordinates into the radio, calling for air support. Moments later, a flight of P-47 Thunderbolts roared overhead, diving through the haze. Rockets streaked down, slamming into the German position. When the dust settled, the Tiger lay crippled, one track blown apart, its crew abandoning the machine. That day became one of the first confirmed kills of a Tiger by a combination of American armor and close air support. It also cemented a new doctrine. No single Sherman could stand against a Tiger, but together, with coordination, artillery, and air power, they could bring one down. The Americans were learning that victory in armored warfare was not just about armor thickness. It was about integration, timing, and sheer determination. Still, morale remained fragile. Letters home from tankers painted a vivid picture of exhaustion and fear. One corporal from the 4th Armored Division wrote, "You can hear it before you see it. That growl, it feels like the earth itself is moving. We keep firing even knowing it won't do much. You fire just so you don't feel helpless." These words, preserved in the archives of the National World War II Museum, captured the essence of the Tiger's psychological warfare. It could dominate a battle long before the first shot. The Americans responded the only way they knew, by pushing harder. As the breakout from Normandy began, Patton's Third Army spearheaded the advance, and with it came the Shermans, hundreds of them, swarming across France like a steel tide. The Tiger could kill, but it couldn't be everywhere. For every one of the German beasts, there were dozens of Shermans maneuvering through the countryside, striking from the flanks, overwhelming isolated German positions. Patton famously declared, "We may not have the best tanks, but we have the best tankers." The contrast between the two machines told the larger story of the war. The Tiger represented precision engineering and overconfidence, a masterpiece that demanded perfect conditions to shine. The Sherman embodied adaptability and endurance, easy to repair, simple to produce, and reliable under any weather. Where one Tiger broke down, 3 Shermans replaced it. In this difference lay the heart of the Allied strategy: quantity and flexibility over perfection. In late August 1944, near Chartres, an American armored column clashed with elements of the German 2nd SS Panzer Division. The Tigers positioned themselves on a ridge, using their superior range to hammer the advancing Shermans. For hours the Americans could barely close the distance. Then, as the evening fog rolled in, the battalion commander gave a desperate order: rush the position at full speed. Engines roared, mud flew, and the Shermans charged uphill, firing on the move. German gunners tried to track them, but visibility dropped. One Sherman managed to flank left, slipping behind a hedgerow. From barely 200 yards, it fired 3 rounds into the side of a Tiger. The last shell penetrated, igniting the ammunition. The explosion tore the turret apart. When the smoke cleared, the surviving crews stared at the wreck, the once feared giant lying broken, its armor split like an eggshell. It was a moment of triumph mixed with disbelief. The crew painted the words "Tiger Buster" on the side of their Sherman and kept moving east. But for every victory there were losses just as painful. In the Hurtgen Forest, during the bitter fighting of late 1944, Tigers again appeared, turning the dense woods into a killing ground. The narrow paths allowed little room for maneuver. Sherman after Sherman fell victim to unseen guns. The trees amplified every explosion, the air filled with the sound of metal tearing apart. The crews learned to fight blind, listening for engines, feeling the vibration of tracks through the ground. The winter brought new horrors. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the Tigers returned in force. The German counteroffensive, launched through the Ardennes, brought some of the last operational Tiger I and Tiger II tanks into battle. American tankers faced not just the old monsters but the new King Tigers, even heavier, even deadlier. For the men of the 7th and 9th Armored Divisions, it was a fight for survival. They dug in, used bazookas, artillery, even point-blank shots from tank destroyers to stop the advance. The snow muffled the sounds of engines, making ambushes even deadlier. But the Americans adapted again. They coordinated with engineers to create choke points, blew bridges to trap the heavy tanks, and used the cold to their advantage, freezing rivers that could bear the weight of their own vehicles but not the enemy's. By Christmas, the Tigers' era was waning. Mechanical failures, fuel shortages, and relentless air attacks had reduced their numbers drastically. The once invincible symbol of German might now stood rusting in ditches or smoldering in forests. Yet the respect remained. Even when a disabled tiger was found abandoned, soldiers stopped to stare. They walked around it, touching its armor, whispering as if in front of a fallen god. For the American tank crews who had lived through those first encounters, from the burning sands of Tunisia to the frozen roads of Bastogne, the tiger would always represent the moment when war became real. It was the enemy that tested every ounce of courage they possessed and taught them the value of unity over machinery. By early 1945, the legend of the Tiger tank had become both a weapon and a ghost. To the Germans who still fought, it was the last symbol of their strength, the embodiment of technical superiority that might yet turn the tide. To the Americans, it remained a shadow that lingered behind every hedgerow and forest line, a reminder of how close courage and fear could live together. Yet the tide of war had shifted. What once was a battlefield monster was now hunted prey. Across France and into Belgium, the U.S. Armored Corps had learned how to fight the tiger. The lessons written in fire and steel during the past 2 years became doctrine. Crews knew never to meet it head-on, never to linger on open ground, never to waste time firing at its frontal armor. The enemy's greatest weapon had become predictable, and predictability in war meant death. Intelligence reports circulated among the divisions, each one filled with detailed diagrams of the Tiger's vulnerabilities. They showed the weak points in the lower hull, the thinner armor around the turret ring, and the exposed engine vents that could ignite with a well-placed high-explosive shell. Instructors drilled this knowledge into recruits until it became reflex. Tank commanders began to see the Tiger not as a myth, but as a machine, dangerous but mortal. The real turning point came not from a single battle but from a change in mentality. The Americans stopped fearing the Tiger and started hunting it. Units like the 4th and 6th Armored Divisions developed coordinated tactics. While one platoon pinned the enemy, others flanked, guided by forward observers and radio spotters. They learned to draw the Tiger's attention, to make it turn its massive turret, a process that took precious seconds, and then strike from the sides. Every tank crew became part of a larger organism, connected by radio discipline and trust. In the Ruhr Valley, a key industrial heart of Germany, these tactics were tested on a grand scale. The terrain was dense with towns, factories, and rivers, ideal ground for ambushes. Tigers hid in ruined streets, their long barrels protruding from shattered windows. When the Americans entered, it became a chess match fought at point-blank range. One after-action report from the 3rd Armored Division described a grim urban encounter near Cologne. As Shermans advanced through the rubble, a single Tiger opened fire from the far end of a street, knocking out 2 tanks instantly. The rest scattered, diving for cover behind buildings. But instead of retreating, one Sherman crew, led by Lieutenant Robert Early, maneuvered into a side alley. Using the echoes of their own engine noise to mask movement, they crept closer. When they emerged from behind a collapsed wall, the Tiger was still facing forward, its attention fixed on the burning wrecks. Early's gunner fired 3 rapid shots. The first 2 ricocheted, but the third slammed into the rear armor grille, where the steel was thinnest. Flames burst out, followed by a dull explosion. The Tiger's turret hatch flew open as its crew tried to escape. The Americans didn't cheer, they just stared at what they had done. Even after the fire died, none of them spoke. It was respect, not celebration. They had defeated something they once thought undefeatable. Such encounters became more frequent as the German army crumbled. The Tiger's greatest weakness wasn't its armor, it was its context. It was a tank built for a war Germany could no longer sustain. Each machine required enormous maintenance, rare fuel, and skilled mechanics that no longer existed in the dying Reich. Many were abandoned, destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. Others were left without fuel, silent statues of defeat. Meanwhile, American production lines continued to pour out Shermans by the thousands. Replacement parts, fuel, and ammunition arrived daily. For every Tiger that appeared, the Allies could field 100 tanks, supported by aircraft and artillery. The balance of war had shifted beyond technology, it was now about endurance, logistics, and willpower. Yet the respect never faded. American engineers often stopped to examine captured Tigers, marveling at the precision of their gears and the thickness of their plates. The reports from Ordnance Intelligence described it as a marvel of craftsmanship, but an example of misplaced priorities. It was too perfect, too demanding, too slow. The Sherman might look crude beside it, but in the mud, in the rain, and under fire, the Sherman kept moving, and that meant victory. For the tank crews, though, the Tiger was more than metal. It was a memory burned into the senses. The flash of its muzzle, the concussion of its gun shaking the earth, the piercing scream of shells. Even months later, veterans could recall the exact pitch of its engine, the low mechanical growl that vibrated through the ground like thunder. They spoke of it with a mix of awe and bitterness, as one might speak of a storm that destroyed their home yet left them alive. In late March 1945, when American forces crossed the Rhine and entered the German heartland, the last operational Tigers fought their final battles. Outside the city of Paderborn, remnants of the 502nd and 506th Heavy Panzer battalions made their stand. The fields were soaked in rain, the air filled with smoke from burning villages. As the Americans advanced, the German crews prepared for one last fight, not for victory but for honor. When the battle began, the Tigers opened fire at long range, scoring several early hits. But the American response was overwhelming. Artillery blanketed the fields, aircraft swooped down in strafing runs, and waves of Shermans pressed forward. The once feared giants were surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off. One by one they were destroyed, not by superior armor but by persistence. A single Tiger, immobilized but still firing, held its ground until the last shell was spent. When American infantry reached it, they found the crew still inside, motionless. The gun barrel pointed toward the horizon, as if still watching for enemies that would never come. The end of the Tiger was not just the end of a tank, it was the end of an idea. The belief that superiority in technology could overcome the determination of free men had finally died on those muddy fields. The Americans, who once trembled at its sight, now walked past its wrecks with quiet respect. In letters sent home during those final weeks, many tankers reflected not on triumph but on survival. They wrote of brothers lost, of the sound of steel tearing, of engines roaring in the night. One veteran, Corporal James Miller, later wrote, "We feared the Tiger, but we learned from it. It made us better soldiers, better men. It taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's what you do when the Tiger fires first." When victory finally came in May 1945, and the guns fell silent, many of those who had faced the Tiger stood beside their Shermans and stared at the empty roads. They had survived the mechanical monsters, the endless rain, the frozen ground. They had fought through fire and terror and come out on the other side. And in that silence, they realized that what truly won the war wasn't armor or firepower, it was endurance, unity, and faith in each other. The Tiger had entered history as both legend and warning. For generations to come, it would be remembered not just as a weapon of war, but as the moment when men learned the limits of fear and the strength of resolve. After the smoke of war had cleared and the silence of peace settled over Europe, the memory of the Tiger remained vivid in the minds of those who had faced it. The battlefields of France, Belgium, and Germany were littered with its wreckage, blackened hulks half buried in mud, silent witnesses to the fury they had once unleashed. But for the American tank crews who survived, those ruins were not trophies. They were reminders of the fear they had overcome, of the friends they had lost, and of the sheer brutality of mechanized war. In the months that followed the German surrender, U.S. Army researchers began collecting captured German tanks for study. Among them were several Tiger I and Tiger II models, carefully transported to testing grounds in England and the United States. Engineers and officers from Aberdeen Proving Ground examined each bolt, each weld, each gear. They measured the thickness of the armor, the slope of the plates, the tolerances of the gun barrel. To them, the Tiger represented a paradox: unmatched engineering brilliance and complete strategic failure. The tests confirmed what the soldiers had already learned on the field. The Tiger was magnificent but fragile, an apex predator built for perfect conditions that rarely existed. It required expert maintenance, constant fuel, and gentle handling. Its transmission broke under stress, its tracks bogged in soft ground, and its complex systems were a nightmare for mechanics in wartime chaos. American engineers noted that while it was deadly in a duel, it was useless in a long campaign. The Sherman, by contrast, could be repaired in the field with little more than a wrench and determination. But among veterans, the discussion was never purely mechanical. For them, the Tiger had been something almost alive, a presence that carried both awe and hatred. In reunions held years later, men spoke about it as though it were an old adversary. Some even admitted they missed the intensity of those encounters. When you knew a tiger was out there, one tanker said in an interview decades later, every sense in your body woke up. You were more alive than you'll ever be again. The tiger became a kind of legend in post-war America, not only in military circles but in the public imagination. Newspapers ran articles about Hitler's monster tank. Museums displayed captured examples, drawing crowds who marveled at its immense size and power. Yet those who had fought against it knew the truth behind the myth. It was not invincible. They had seen it burn. They had watched its engines fail, its turrets jam, its proud crews surrender. And they knew that behind every piece of steel there were men, frightened, cold, and mortal just like them. As America transitioned from war to peace, many former tankers struggled to adjust. The noise, the adrenaline, the ever-present threat of the tiger, all of it faded too quickly. The world became quiet, too quiet. Some found solace in their units' reunions, gathering to retell stories of the old days. The talk always returned to that first moment of shock, the first time they had seen the tiger crest a ridge or emerge from the smoke of battle. Even decades later, the description was the same: a giant, slow-moving wall of iron, its gun searching like an eye, its presence suffocating. Those memories became part of America's collective story of World War II. Documentaries, books, and films turned the tiger into a symbol of German might and Allied perseverance. It appeared in training manuals and historical analyses, in museums and model kits. But to the men who had faced it, the legend carried a quieter meaning. It was proof of what they had survived. In the late 1940s and 1950s, when the Cold War dawned, many of those same veterans watched a new generation of soldiers climb into tanks built with lessons learned from the tiger's shadow. The M26 Pershing, the M46 Patton, all bore traces of what the tiger had taught their predecessors: the importance of gun power, crew visibility, sloped armor, and reliability. What had once been a weapon of fear had become a teacher of progress. In conversations preserved by the U.S. Army's Oral History Program, tankers often reflected on how that fear had shaped them. One veteran put it simply: the tiger made us smarter. We stopped thinking like drivers and started thinking like hunters. That mindset carried into doctrine, shaping how America approached armored warfare for generations. But beyond tactics and steel, the tiger's greatest legacy lay in the human spirit it revealed. When men were outgunned, outmatched, and surrounded, they did not surrender to despair. They adapted. They learned. They fought back. And in doing so, they proved that courage could outweigh technology. As the years turned into decades, the memory of those early encounters took on a different light. The men who had once trembled at the sight of the tiger now spoke of it with calm reflection. Some visited the few surviving examples in museums, standing before them in quiet contemplation. The smell of oil and rust brought back the heat of battle, the vibration of treads beneath their feet, the smell of smoke and burning metal. But instead of hatred, they felt a strange respect. The tiger had defined a part of their lives, and in facing it, they had defined themselves. For the families of those veterans, the stories became heirlooms. Sons and daughters grew up hearing about the monster tank that no one thought could be beaten. Grandchildren listened to tales of bravery, of fear, of triumph. Through those stories, the tiger lived on, not as a weapon of terror but as a measure of what ordinary men could endure and overcome. By the 1970s, only a handful of Tiger tanks remained intact. One of them, Tiger 131, fully restored in Britain, became a living monument. When it rumbled to life for demonstrations, the sound echoed across generations. Old soldiers wept. They said the vibration in the air was the same as in 1944, that deep, chest-shaking growl that once meant death, now transformed into memory. For the historians who study that era, the tiger represents both the peak and the folly of German engineering. For the Americans who fought it, it represents something simpler and far more human, the test that proved their courage. When the veterans gathered in their later years, they would sometimes close their eyes as the museum engine started, and for a moment they were young again, back in the mud, gripping the turret handles, hearts pounding, waiting for the next shell to land. The world around them had changed, but inside those moments, it was still 1944. The tiger was still out there somewhere, hidden in the fog, and they were still the men who had faced it, afraid, determined, unbreakable. Decades after the thunder of war faded, the echo of the tiger still rumbles through history. Its shape, its sound, and the awe it inspired continue to haunt the pages of books, the screens of films, and the hearts of those who once stood before it. To this day, veterans who fought in Normandy, the Ardennes, and across the plains of Germany remember not only the fear it brought, but the strength they found because of it. The Tiger was more than a tank, it was a test of human endurance, a challenge that turned young men into warriors. In every war there is a moment when technology meets the will of men. For the Americans of the Armored Corps, that moment came when they first saw the Tiger crest a hill and heard the deep roar of its Maybach engine shaking the ground beneath their boots. They knew they were outgunned. They knew that one wrong move could turn their Sherman into a burning coffin. Yet they fought. Not because they thought they would win every time, but because they refused to let fear define them. That refusal, that unyielding resolve, became the true measure of victory. When historians speak of the Tiger today, they often focus on its technical marvels. The 88mm gun that could pierce steel from over a mile away, the 100mm of frontal armor, the mechanical complexity that required a small army of mechanics to sustain. But those numbers tell only part of the story. The real story lies in the human eyes that stared back at it across the battlefield, tired, frightened, but determined. Letters written by American tankers in 1945 still survive in archives, yellowed and fragile. They speak not of hatred but of awe. One private wrote to his wife, "I saw one today, the Tiger they all talk about. I thought it was the end. But we got him. It took everything we had and we lost some good men, but we stopped it. When it finally went up in flames, I felt no joy, just relief, like the world had started breathing again." That feeling, the mix of fear, sorrow, and pride, defined the armored war in Europe. It wasn't about glory or revenge. It was about survival and brotherhood. Each man knew that the one beside him was the only thing standing between him and the burning light of the Tiger's gun. In that bond, in that shared danger, they found something unbreakable. When peace finally came, many of those men returned home carrying invisible scars. The sound of thunder reminded them of gunfire. The smell of oil or rain on metal could bring back the battlefield in an instant. Some never spoke of it again. Others told their children stories not of death, but of courage, stories where ordinary men faced the impossible and endured. The Tiger became part of those stories, part of their legend. Its name, once spoken in terror, became a word of respect. It represented the enemy's best, and the reason America had to give its best in return. In military museums across the world, when the preserved engines of a Tiger start and the air trembles, the visitors hear not only the sound of a machine but the heartbeat of history. Old tankers who stand and watch it run are no longer afraid. They listen with quiet pride, remembering the day when they heard that sound for real and decided to fight anyway. They know that courage is not the absence of fear but the mastery of it. The Tiger taught them that lesson, and through them it taught the world. Today, long after the men who first faced it have grown old and passed on, their stories remain. Every burned-out field, every photograph, every journal entry whispers the same truth. Machines rust, empires fall, but courage endures. The Tiger's shadow may stretch across history, but it is illuminated by the light of those who stood against it. Their legacy is not written in victories or medals, but in the silence that follows when we read their words or see their faces. It is the silence of respect, the kind ode to those who met fear face to face and kept moving forward. The Tiger was Germany's might. The American tanker was humanity's resilience. And now, as this story ends, the echo of their struggle still lives, in museums, in history books, in the hearts of those who listen and remember. The roar of the Tiger is gone, but the spirit of those who faced it will never fade. If you felt that echo while listening, the admiration, the pride, the gratitude, then keep it alive. Write your thoughts in the comments below, share what you felt, and subscribe so that the memory of these men, their courage, and the lessons they left behind continue to be heard by generations yet to come.